How did this come about? Was this a conscious choice? Were you like a avid gamer that this is what I want to be?
I've been fortunate, and today if I look back it could seem like serendipity, but I started with advertising because at a very early age I was keen to understand brand. What appealed to me was the addressable TAM. Some of the games that we were building at that point in time had a considerable TAM, and if you kind of swing it with skill-based RMG, it kind of gave us a clear view that a company
This is
that
huge and well-be. In some sense, it's also gotten a whole bunch of competition in because it's attractive as a space.
So there is definitely a lot of overlap between fantasy and casual gaming space. The seasonality bit tends to play out when there is, let's say, active cricket World Cup or IPL. That sort of impact can be seen on casual as well as card games. So our larger approach is based on a key metric, evaluating each channel of acquisition on a LTV by CAC.
That's by itself a mature practice compared to 80% companies out there. Hi and welcome to one more episode of the State of Retention Marketing podcast. Today's conversation is about gaming. It's an industry that has exploded in India. There's a lot of interesting action that's happening, and in my impression, gaming folks tend to be one of the most sophisticated bunch when it comes to understanding retention. The lifetime values that they see in their business are quite amazing. We have with us Nishant Jaiswal. Nishant leads all things marketing for a company called Zupee. They have a portfolio of very interesting games and are operating in a rather competitive space. Well, Nishant, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Ankur. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the interesting conversation.
Super cool. So, Nishant, you've had a fair bit of journey in marketing as a profession, and you happen to be in a very exciting space in gaming. How did this come about? Was this a conscious choice? Were you like a avid gamer that this is what I want to be? How did that journey play out?
So it's been about 15 odd years, I think, my career span, and it didn't start with digital or core marketing. I've been fortunate, and today if I look back it could seem like serendipity, but I started with advertising because at a very early age I was keen to understand brand and branding. So I started with advertising, Ogilvy, JWT, working with telecom giants like Airtel or Vodafone.
Right.
And there I think I learned to appreciate the art of finding the human truth, appreciating creative insight. And that still is something that I can dial back to.
Sure.
And the certain frameworks don't change, which helped me today. From advertising, I think the stint was towards digital very planned because digital was booming, and I joined Times at that time, which was recently launching Ghana.com. I mean, at that point in time, music streaming was relatively new.
Sure.
Most of it we either, piracy or mixtapes. We were evolving. Yeah. Broad thought was that for a user, internet is a cost, and music streaming paid subscription was something which was
Still early.
very early stage. So the task at hand was to actually introduce and build this ecosystem, which is music streaming. And there were very few players in the market who were doing it at scale and efficiently. So, and I was also looking at performance, digital traffic planning.
So at some point, the creative insight side moved to the numbers side of things as well.
Yes. So that's where the transition towards performance marketing, acquisition, retention, increasing key metrics for the business.
Sure.
Typically a digital product ecosystem. From there, I think it took an interesting turn because Mahindra Comviva was my third stint, which was for a fintech company that they were trying to build in Nigeria. So I used to shuttle between the Delhi office and the Nigeria office. It was partnered with another company at the Lagos office. And that market is completely different. I mean, and that's where I first was introduced to the power of gaming and maybe real money gaming to a certain extent. So the average salary for a working class Nigerian would be somewhere under $1,000, and they were spending close to about 2% monthly on RMG, and their sports betting was legal. So that's and this was part of my research work and product research, where we were figuring out, other than mobile recharges, what all other services can help retain user better.
Okay.
And this was very interesting discovery, and my first kind of figuring out
a fintech homework which led you to gaming.
Yeah, to a certain extent. When I moved back to India, I started with Lenskart. Lenskart was my first omni-channel experience.
Sure.
Very interesting learnings. I was responsible.
A bunch of interesting dots getting connected very clearly.
Yeah. largely I was responsible for. I had learning on the branding piece, planning the mainline media planning,
Sure.
and I was responsible for running digital mandates, which included product marketing as well as acquisition, repeat purchase.
Sure.
And there also, I think, pretty interesting learning where we were able to stitch the journey between online and offline, because there were a few interesting insights on how discovery was happening online, but because of the proximity of the store and the uniqueness of the product, touch and feel product, which the purchase was actually happening offline. And
This is a big
how
puzzle for a lot of brands even today.
yeah. So we were able to kind of build a framework
those
where
dots.
digital efforts, how is it resulting in a repeat purchase or a new user exploration or a store footfall. Post Lenskart is when I started.
Sorry, just to clarify within this, was there established evidence of merit in trying to cross-pollinate these two ecosystems?
There was a framework that was being built. Largely, a unique user identifier is what they were leveraging, as either it could be a phone number or a unique click on a single MMP tracker, where they were able to kind of stitch, or we were able to kind of stitch the online exploration to offline purchase.
Sure.
And this also helped us with a repeat purchase measurement, because for a product like spectacles, the repeat purchase cycle is not as frequent as a regular e-commerce purchase, right? It could range between an 8 to 12 month repeat purchase behavior. And so there were a lot of uninstalls that would happen during this window.
Of course.
So every time you are a user wants to explore, that's when a new install is happening, and that could happen with a paid or a organic behavior. From there, I think I was anyways keen to explore gaming.
Sure.
And
the seeds sown in Lagos.
Yes. So I got an opportunity to lead the entire P&L piece with Adda 52, largely their poker business. And so I was looking at product packaging, promotions, tournament P&Ls, marketing, brand, social, everything apart from the call center piece and the calling piece. So, and Zupee was, I think, I've spent about close to 3 years now with Zupee. And largely the decision for Zupee was, I think, the way they were building for the Bharat audience.
I think this is the first time you've repeated something in some sense from gaming to gaming. So clearly some degree of fascination there.
Yes. So I think what appealed to me was the addressable TAM, because some of the games that we were building at that point in time had a considerable TAM, and if you kind of swing it with skill-based gaming or RMG, it kind of gave us a clear view that that's a company that's
huge and available. And is there, let's say, a metric in India that you now are able to think about, that this is 2% of your monthly income you're spending on this stuff? Is that so evident or clear?
It's no, I think it'll, because India is a billion plus audience, and it's still evolving in terms of whether it is internet penetration, mobile device, and gaming itself is evolving so rapidly. So I think a broad statement like that
would
be too early.
And in some sense, it's also gotten a whole bunch of competition in because it's attractive as a space. So from your lens at Zupee now, and in terms of the kind of categories you play or the segments you play in, it could be product segment or the market or audience segment. And you said Bharat is a definition of the TAM. It's a fairly broad definition. So would you be in a position to articulate slightly sharper, or how do you play in the competitive landscape?
So largely, if I were to look at gaming or real money gaming, there is a clear division between fantasy. Then there are card games, which could include Rummy or other variants. And then there is the casual board game space.
Okay.
Now, when I said Bharat audience, the casual board game space, typically games like Ludo and Snakes and Ladders, and these are games which are very native to Indian culture and even certain global markets as well. And I think with those nuances, that there is an addressable TAM, and if you are there are existing gamers out there which you can appeal to at the basis of nostalgia, of easy onboarding. These are certain, and obviously it's for Ludo, technically I think out of 100 people, 99 would have played it at certain point in time or would know. So we do enjoy a very good onboarding journey as compared to, let's say, my previous stint at poker. If you ask 100 people, maybe 5 or less than 5 would have actually played poker
Yeah,
or
still
be a
complicated.
poker player. So it's a very niche market from where Ludo
So
appeared
that's
to
the
be
lens you're
much
applying
bigger.
to that being like the top tier of the spectrum, perhaps the elite audience, and this is like way more mainstream. Just the whole lens on the 0 to 1 journey to establish that PMF and then figuring, okay, this is what we're prepared to scale. There are, let's say, market share battles that these are established players who are playing on some sort of merit or story. And then there are category creation games. So in some sense, as far as your portfolio design is concerned, how are you playing this out?
So there is definitely a lot of overlap between fantasy and casual gaming
Sure.
space, and the seasonality bit tends to play out when there is, let's say, active cricket, World Cup, or IPL, and that sort of impact can be seen on casual as well as card games.
Sure.
So,
You mean to say people who would have otherwise played this will end up going to the fantasy world?
or at least some amount of time
There'll be
share or
some
wallet
time share that'll go.
right? So that is expected, and we usually plan our marketing strategies and our approach keeping seasonality in mind.
Understood. So just in terms of the whole lens on being number obsessed, you're leading marketing for a gaming platform. It's one of the largest market share in some of the categories that you play in. How do you, let's say, optimize the key metrics around acquisition with an eye on retention versus without an eye on retention, which is growth at all costs kind of a mindset. So what's been your lens over the last few years at different stages of the company's growth phase?
So let's understand the funnel first. If half the job is done, if my acquisition or the entry points for a user is something where I start looking at M1 retention,
Okay.
if I start looking at the LTVs that are projected or expected from a certain channel. So our larger approach is based on a key metric where we are evaluating each channel of acquisition on a LTV by CAC
Okay.
greater than 1.
That's by itself a mature practice compared to 80% of companies out there.
Yeah. So what we've done is we can very efficiently at a 7-day window or recalibrate our spends and budgets and strategies at a 7-day window. We can actually predict to a certain accuracy that whether this channel is going to break even in, let's say, a 24-month period. And if the projected LTV by CAC is something that we're not as at par, or if there are better channels, we tend to sort of toggle between different channels. So that's one, just scratching the
Would you
surface.
at a channel level, or would you dig, a few more layers,
Much deeper.
way deeper, right? I would imagine, because channel is ultimately those 4 or 5, and there's only so far that those interpretations will go.
Well, we work, if you say channel level, then there are source level. So channel would
Sure,
be, let's
I
say,
was talking about
organic
just
or a
Facebook,
paid
Google
or a
lenses, and
referral.
if those are 2 channels, then there's only so far this will tell you, but you'll go 5 levels deeper, right? The source, the medium, the whatever.
So we've worked with more than 250 channels, and
Okay.
today, very efficiently and with confidence, I can say that there are certain channels that have evolved to at least be at par with the Google and Facebooks of the world.
That's
for
very
gaming.
fascinating. In terms of, I would have imagined this to be like a couple of spikes and then a whole bunch of long tail. But you're saying that there's a couple of additional channels that have come up to the same volume and scale as
Yes.
a
So
typical Google or
what
Facebook.
has over the last 2 to 3 years, what has changed is that programmatic and the advent of AI/ML has really revolutionized the power of, let's say, from a bidding platform to actually a conversion platform.
Okay.
Or a conversion goal-based campaigns, and that has been the real pivoting point where earlier this sort of technology was leveraged by very few, and now there are a lot of other platforms that have started building towards similar capabilities.
Got it.
So,
and which is where your allocation is also increasing towards those
Yes.
platforms. That gives you better ROI and impact.
So one is to kind of look at it from a source and channel level and optimize for channels which tend to give at least a break-even point where it is greater than 1, right?
Sure.
From a LTV perspective. Second is to, from an acquisition perspective, focus on early retention metrics. So let's say insights, and this is just basic data which helps us build journeys or let's say contest to move users towards a higher retention rate. So we figured that, let's say, if within a 24-hour window, if somebody is able to play more than 5 games, a higher chances of becoming a paying user.
Okay.
So that insight itself gives us multiple levers within product to kind of nudge a user to ensure that he's trying, or more and more users are playing at least this,
crossing
or reaching
over
this milestone.
So to speak, loop frequency is the term that's often used, right?
Yes.
Fair.
So, and there are multiple insights that are leveraged. So then journeys and within product journeys or contests is something that we leverage to move users from a signed up stage to a cash game player, D3 cash game player retention, then from a depositor to a D7 retention, largely resulting in a higher M1 retention metric for
It's
an
kind
end
of where
user.
you started with the whole concept of funnels. I mean, you have X number of installs, you have X number of signups, you have X number of the people that are activated, and then you have X number of people that, let's say, D3, D7, ultimately adding up to M1.
Correct.
So it seems like a fairly well, let's say, documented / articulated funnel structure where a lot of things are math-based and decision-making is very, let's say, objective in nature. Do you see some of these elements you mentioned about this insight about 5 games in a day means this? Now, is this something which had a bit of gut element to it, or was this purely what data threw at you?
We were actually looking for insights to move the needle. So this was a deliberate, let's say, trying to find out insight that can be leveraged rather than, because just by sending push notifications or communicating at large won't move the needle unless you've understood the gamer's behavior. And if at large data can throw that insight that, okay, this is a larger prediction which is possible, that if by behavior 5 games are played within a certain time span, there is a higher probability. So it's largely a number base.
So I'm trying to now draw back from the previous lenses that you applied in terms of what does this mean from an audience persona lens? Did this say something to you in terms of the channel that you were using? Were search channels getting you more such users than others? And then how did that change your acquisition strategy or the kind of communication you're doing from a creative side?
Such insights are largely applicable for most of the users because this largely captures the intent.
Right.
From an acquisition perspective, if you're looking at only net new users, largely we're looking at the cost that we are getting the user and the expected revenue that this user will give to me in 30 days or 365. Or
that's factoring the fact that this guy's played 5 games in a day. So, the cohort of users which are behaving in the so-called ideal fashion, they must have come from a set of sources. I don't know if there is a way to map specifically which sources are giving you high quality users. So the part I was trying to zoom in was in terms of the LTV to CAC. Now, of course, there's this cutoff point that below this doesn't make sense. But within that ecosystem, what qualifies, also you have an optimization method and sort of framework. And that's what I was trying to double click on, that, okay, if I were to build my funnel using only the channels which are giving me high quality users, these 100 channels have to go off because they're not giving me the M1 of whatever level.
So what we leverage in order to figure out higher revenue or high yielding users is the goal of the campaign. So in today's time, one goal could be getting a depositing user.
Sure.
But then there are ROAS and TROAS campaigns that by design give you higher revenue yielding users.
Sure.
And for that, maybe the cost is 20% higher of acquiring via those campaigns. But the LTV to CAC would be greater than 1, or as opposed to a nascent depositing user campaign.
Understood. And when you said that there are AI and ML mechanisms now to optimize advertising with a conversion goal that could be set differently compared to what a traditional Google or Facebook system does, and there are more publishers adopting to that kind of an outcome-based approach, is this where we're saying that, okay, I'm going to look at my M1 ROAS as a metric to optimize, and the system will do a bit of intelligent work to make that happen?
So Google and Facebook had always leveraged AI and ML to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So it's not like they don't have the capability, they were the masters.
Of course, they're and you want to find a ways to stay outside of that ecosystem as well, right?
What programmatic has evolved to is that at an earlier time, it was largely based on bidding. So whatever remnant inventory or inventory that was not being tapped into was we were able to real-time buy through exchanges, through SSPs and DSPs. What has changed is that today, now it is not just buying an inventory, it is also from answering where and when and to who. So what this does is that the AI and ML is actually tracking a user at multiple platform level, and the ML knowledge is feeding into, so millions of sort of data points are flowing into within milliseconds, and that's what the AI is kind
Sure.
of calibrating whether the
Yeah.
impression is to be thrown at a user level. So that's what has changed, and that's
Sure.
what results in higher success today, as opposed to a bidding based buying maybe 3-4 years back, before the AI
Fair.
ML leveraged by programmatic.
So the part that I was trying to zoom into was to this engine that's now serving your ads across a bunch of these interfaces, the conversion optimization. Is that still the install as a goal, or do you set up these multiple goals you spoke about, install plus activation and then deposit and then perhaps M1 retention? So would you include, let's say, a more richer bunch of downstream metrics as part of the optimization play on acquisition?
Yes. So ROAS and typically revenue campaigns have a certain threshold, because it's leveraging certain intelligence that is already there with the channel level, right? Whether it is the AI ML learning or the campaign learning. So though they are high yielding channels, but it has certain threshold because it's limited by the number of users that are out there. If you were to sort of set up campaigns and acquire newer user, or get the fence sitters in the funnel, you have to set up campaigns at the top of the funnel. That's where you generate more users. So somebody who is likely to play Ludo versus somebody who is a Ludo player versus somebody who is a RMG Ludo player. That's the difference.
In some sense, it's a market share grab versus, let's say, category creation.
Early adopters versus, let's say, laggers to maybe.
I mean, after all of these games, investing all this time and effort in getting people to play Ludo, if some people are still yet to play their first game of Ludo online, it's where the top of the funnel would come from. So, we spoke about the whole idea of optimizing acquisition while keeping retention in mind. And now there's a bunch of lenses to apply on how to solve for retention effectively. Within the customer journey, within a particular game, there's a bunch of these things that can happen well versus not well versus poorly to kind of make sure he's coming back and M1 is solved for. Let's just double click a little bit on when you have these happy flows that M1 is great, but there's a percentage of users which is not coming back. What are the set of things that happen in your world to make sure this number looks better?
So if I were to divide my retention efforts broadly basis users, one is a new user effort, which kind of moves to the M1 needle.
Right.
Second is and most critical is the power user cohort, which tend to kind of deliver more than 65 to 70% to the overall revenue that gets generated. And then third bunch is the month-on-month retention. So somebody who's playing last month, how many of them would continue to play the next month? If I were to break it, then it could be D3, D7, because within gaming, or as compared to other categories like a e-commerce or a fintech, the repeat rate is much higher, the frequency, the number of active days. And that's what we're trying to largely achieve.
I mean, you're competing for attention share from a Netflix or whatever, you'd rather play a game.
Correct. So when it comes to, let's say, a month-over-month retention or a power user cohort, the kind of gameplay changes. So for example, we focus a lot on experience. So what we've largely built is a recommendation engine that kind of bases a lot of game behavior, previous win rate, the preferred table. We kind of recommend the best suited table for the player. Then there is automation in terms of addressing any sort of bad experiences within the game. So let's say if you're in a poor network area and there is any sort of glitch that happens, we have certain rules where we can kind of automatically see that if somebody was in a leading position and he abandoned the game, that immediately raises a flag that okay, there could be certain reasons why he abandoned, and then basis certain rules, that query is escalated, and if it is a network issue or a game glitch, there is an instant refund that
this is automated for you.
This is automated. And this has actually helped bring down about 40% on refund tickets that we used to get. And obviously there are certain cases which requires better visibility.
Larger,
those are escalated.
This in some sense, no. So of course there's going to be some, let's say, leftover stuff that will get escalated, but this whole fact that this is automatically done does increase the consumer confidence as well.
And a lot.
You watch that as a pattern that, okay, people who've gotten one refund are slightly more, let's say, trusting of the platform.
So the churn prediction model actually indicated that users with a ticket being open on refund or any sort of game glitch had a higher tendency to churn, and that's understandable. And that's where the efforts towards creating an automation module to
Right.
address this was key priority, and we've actually seen
Fair
good
enough, and
results.
you can very clearly see that delta coming, right? So in some sense, proactive customer service, even if it might seem, let's say, tactically a little expensive because you're returning all that money, but in the larger scheme of things, it's just paying off very well.
Yeah, and for power users, I think I can actually quote this, that our retention rate would be more than 90% month on month.
Month on month.
Yes, and that's where a lot of focus, whether it is through journeys or figuring out the best sort of in-game experience for these users, because this sort of bunch contributes to the more
societal
than
charm.
70%.
How do you enter the power user cohort? What behavior do you have to demonstrate to get in there?
The consistency of the game. Inherently, power users do tend to uninstall and install a lot, because it is a lot to do with, let's say, your win rate or your PNL, most recent PNL
At
that
an
a user
individual
could
level.
recall. Yeah. But largely dependent, you enter a power user cohort basis a certain size of the game, the frequency of the game, and the revenue that you generate.
So in some sense, if I've demonstrated, at how early do you know that I'm showing signs of being potentially a power user? There's new power users getting added.
We have
every month,
that prediction modeling built,
Right.
but to replicate that on acquisition channels has been something that we're dabbling with.
Sure.
We can predict with a lot of accuracy to the potential power user base, but to recreate or acquire them through a certain channel mix is something that we yet to figure out.
So I'm now curious about at what point do you know that this is either potentially power user. Let's say 2x the, if this group of users are supposed to be power users and some of them are not showing up in my retention, I'll do an extra job on the incentive to bring them back. So do you look at differential incentives across users to bring them back because they show different predicted patterns, lifetime value?
So largely there are two ways. One is segmentation, second is personalization.
Of course.
So segmentation is largely done basis, let's say, a user being inactive for a certain number of days, or his life stage on the game, or let's say the kind of deposit behavior that he's exhibited.
So RFM proxies in some sense seems like it. Yeah.
Whereas personalization is more towards moving the user to achieve his, or let's say, move him up to a higher table, or help him spend more time, or play the more number of games.
Sure.
So this is where certain product level contests or modules help push a user towards or nurture a user towards becoming a power user. Whether it could be number of games kind of contest, which is specially designed for at a personalized level.
In some sense, you're putting a bunch of these, let's say, leaderboard-ish kind of mechanics to get people to behave in a certain direction to achieve that particular milestone, which in effect makes it a power user for you.
Correct. So it also helps protect your wallet share, because a user has to commit to a certain number of games instead of, and some of the users might actually have a behavior of toggling between different categories.
Right.
So like I said, there is an overlap between, let's say, ludo and fantasy.
Right.
So this also helps kind of protect your wallet share.
Your wallet. So if you've locked in money here, then you will kind of continue to play here. Some of this is considered addictive. At some point, at a systematic level, is there a way to draw a line on where the user is showing addictive behavior? Or is that something you leave it to the user's judgment? Because, if he's not coming to you, you'll probably spend time elsewhere. So it's not something that you can solve for if he's getting too far with the game.
So first of all, I think the game is only accessible in allowed states and for age group greater than 18 years of old age. And there is, because there is a money element, there is obviously authenticated KYC that is required. Over and above that, we have a responsible gaming framework, which to a certain extent extends to setting up limitations on gameplay, the amount of money that you want to play with, the amount of loss capability. So it's actually first a risk-taking ability analysis, a set of about 8 to 9 questions that a user is supposed to answer, basis which his risk abilities are assessed, and basis that there are certain recommendations on limiters, whether it is on the number of games or your loss, losing appetite. Over and above that, if there is any sign of distress that any user exhibits or reaches us, we have like
Counseling sorts.
counseling partners,
Right.
where we kind of move these cases to these counseling partners for the right help.
So in some sense, it's behaving fairly responsibly that while of course we're a gaming company, we want you to play responsibly. So let us know what your, let's say, limits are. And if you end up crossing over and you're feeling struggling, then you might as well just seek help and we're there to help. Very, it doesn't in some sense also enable more trust because what you're trying to do at a user level, I'm slightly more comfortable with a platform that is being, let's say, somewhat more transparent about some of these things than somebody who's just like a casino out there to get my money, right?
That's a very critical question, especially when you talk about RMG, real money gaming. Trust is one of the big things to solve for, right? And that's where I think our let's say trust markers kind of come in, both within the product and in the Marcom that we have.
I was going to go back to your creative insights from the advertising days.
Yeah.
Right?
So within the product, we have something called Zupee Adda, which actually leverages the insight that I'll give you a very one nugget.
Sure.
People tend to or are more confident to play if their opponent actually has a profile image and a username instead of a guest name and a avatar. So what Zupee Adda does is to actually give a clear showcase of how there are other players who are real players who are playing. In fact, Zupee Adda, more than 40% of people who've signed up on Zupee Adda have more than one odd or are following one or more people, and there are certain profiles which have more than 5 lakh and above followers. So there are clear stars amongst the gamers that people are following.
Social/community angle is coming.
Yes. In addition to that, we obviously have a thriving community across all social media channels, be it WhatsApp, Instagram, Telegram, Facebook. That also kind of adds up to that entire aura and ecosystem of trust. There is a lot of community that there are times when there are certain concerns that any player is raised on social media, and the community itself is trying to resolve an answer for this. So I think with that sense, it helps, the community really helps to kind of build trust. And how we kind of solve for trust in Marcom is largely leveraging the fact that it is trusted by 7 crore and more players.
A certain number of people.
Yes.
It's just a quantity of it.
Yeah. And we realized that there are certain aha moments that you want to communicate within the communication. So these trust markers, whether trusted by so many people or because we are a no bot policy, we are only real player game. These are certain things that it's important to communicate because these are certain barriers that people might have.
Sure.
Or it's something which makes a difference between a fence sitter barriers to RMG.
Fair enough. And to me, this is where the creative insights start to come into action from what you've learned as an approach before. And this whole lens on community now, you can't possibly track at a PII level what's happening on other platforms like Facebook or whatever, but you would have the Adda information fairly intimately because that's your own platform. So in some sense, is there a, let's say, way to say with confidence that the people who are members of a community who have written more than once or answered a question tend to have a better downstream behavior? Is that something that you're tracking? Is that something you've seen evidence of?
So what we've definitely seen is that there is a lot of overlap between our social media community, to answer the first question, and our user base. So there are people who are on the social media page, maybe they like the content or they're still evaluating, and they're not signed up on the platform yet.
Okay.
And there is a huge bunch of users who are actual Ludo first users or Zupee users and then join the community. So what I mean is that first, social media also tends to start building awareness with these trust markers and is helping sort of moving the user within the funnel. To a second point, for, like I said, the Zupee Adda, largely we've seen that, like I said, there is people who are 40% of the people are actually following one or the other player. So definitely there is some amount of trust which helps retention.
Sure.
But I think it's too early to kind of say for sure that what are the impacts on retention largely.
Fair enough. And is there an active charter to get this 40% to something more, because that would automatically feed back into the system, right?
Yes. So a lot of new product dev work is happening largely on, let's say, improving the profile picture experience, because if we want more people to kind of start uploading their profile pictures because it adds to a trust marker, we're leveraging AI ML to make it more exciting, right?
Sure.
So those are certain initiatives that are in the works.
It just become a richer social media experience overall. So if someone's commenting, somebody's adding followers, all of those components start to come in, and that will just add engagement to the application. So people come here not just for the games perhaps, but also the conversations. Potentially the direction.
So it's also it acts as a means of inspiration, because if you're following a player on Zupee Adda, and let's say you just about started your journey, you can actually look at his win rate, his strategy, what kind of games he's playing, and kind of pursue that as a goal, and which in a way helps nurturing the user to a certain extent, which might not be quantified by number, but it is sort of helping a user set a target and his journey on the game.
Interesting. And it's also in some sense a lot of prestige for the guy who's up there in the charts.
Yes, there's a lot of brag value. In fact, if you dial back, like poker is very big on brag value.
Absolutely.
Right. So we used to have very tightly knit community, because it's such a niche that community itself had the power to drive certain policy changes. On
the platform.
On the platform. So I think the Ludo community is very large, very diverse. In fact, more than 60% of the users would actually new users would come from tier 2 and tier 3.
Absolutely.
That's what the point is, right? The Bharat audience.
The Bharat audience.
Yes. So it's very diverse. And I think we have to sort of keep a very open arms policy in terms of how their social behavior or what channels they interact with, and how do we sort of give them a sense of belonging within the platform. And that's what Zupee Adda does, right?
Sure.
It's people like you with same aspirations, and if somebody else is sort of able to achieve a certain badge or a scale or a win rate, that kind of inspires you, to play more.
The whole relatability ends up adding substantially, and it's very interesting the point you make about, if I know the person on the other side by face and by name, perhaps some sort of additional marker, it just improves my trust and confidence in playing with it, so that I'm not, let's say, leaving it purely to chance that I'm going to win. It shows the skill/strategy that I'm applying in this game, and then according to the game, it seems fairer and more trustable. So Nishant, Bharat is a complex market, fairly large, fairly interesting, fairly attractive, but it would automatically have a bunch of bearings on how you design some of these things. I understand the platform is primarily operating in Hindi and English, but have you considered going beyond that, either in the product or as part of your comms efforts? And what changes, and have you seen anything to be of meaningful, delta value in that sense?
Yeah, so first is to find the right product for the market fit. So Ludo is the primary and the largest game, which is very native to Indian culture itself. That gives us a large enough TAM to kind of address to. Then if I were to look at from a new user lens, tier 2 and tier 3 markets, because of let's say affordable devices, internet penetration, and let's say mobile literacy, kind of unlocks a lot of potential market in tier 2 and tier 3, typically my Bharat audience. And third, language or going hyperlocal from product as well as comm perspective, it's very critical. So we are dabbling. There is an option of Hindi as well as English, and we've seen from a comm perspective that if users who selected Hindi as their preferred platform language tend to respond better with Hindi as their comm language. And we've seen a stark difference in the CTRs on any communication that we send out to them.
Interesting.
Over and above that, going more regional on product side is something that we've explored earlier. Still, the playbook
language
is
or beyond that?
Largely on the language, or let's say the game itself. but I think the playbook is still at a nascent stage
Clearly.
in terms of
You have enough room to grow without having to go
Yes,
that
absolutely.
far with it. And given the nature of complexity of this whole ecosystem, there is also this whole technology stack that becomes very critical. You've been a marketer who started off as an advertiser, and I've had a fairly interesting dimension on performance, and then now onwards to the entire marketing charter on growth. Help us understand a bit about how do you go about assembling a stack which is appropriate for the stage of the company, because the maturity curve also evolves, your needs also evolve. Getting too fancy too quickly might also be a problem area. So how do you kind of craft a stack which is good for you today and when you started, and how do you evolve it from the choice of components of things that you brought in?
So from a marketing standpoint, and I've been a digital marketing, largely mobile driven applications.
Sure.
For me, the most critical piece to solve is attribution at first.
Right.
Because to what point am I able to sort of drill down on the channels and sources where my marketing dollars are being spent? So finding the right MMP which can solve for, let's say, a web to app to a mobile web attribution, or to, let's say, a omni-channel behavior. Right. So that becomes a critical piece for a digital product company to solve for, typically from an acquisition standpoint. Then building channels or technical capabilities within, let's say, to build a referral engine, which kind of tends to bring high value users.
Helps you acquire better.
Right. Third is from a product marketing or remarketing perspective, abilities to sort of solve or leverage, let's say, push notification, emails, SMS,
The communication side
side of things, and setting up journeys and triggers, which otherwise manually
Automation
is
sorts.
difficult. Yes, difficult to solve for. Third is how to sort of identify tools that are more scalable and more, let's say, can work in synergy with other tools. So can my, let's say, product marketing tool help or get integrated with my offer panel, my banner panels, to give me a more seamless user experience from a com to actual application usability of the service. So that is another lens that we need to evaluate a tool with. Third, from a product perspective or tech stack perspective, it needs to be scalable. So whether my servers are or at least capable to auto scale when my campaigns really hit a hockey stick growth in traffic, or if a brand campaign and, let's say, acquisition efforts are growing, is it sort of capable enough to handle that kind of load? So these are certain things
that you'll tell your CDO to be prepared for, that this is, let's say, our traffic forecast / engagement forecast, and you need to be making the intra well.
Correct. And when you have, let's say, seasonality at play, Ludo might be less impacted by seasonality. Let's take fantasy, for example. Right?
It's always going to be around the World Cups and
it's going to be hockey stick growths in terms of traffic, and there is when you have to have an ecosystem that can handle that spikes, and then again scale down when required.
Of course, otherwise you're just burning a whole bunch of money. Those things can be expensive. Across all of these components, there is going to be meaningful room for AI and ML to play. I would imagine there is components that you're already using. Some of them would have already shown evidence of being incrementally useful. If you could tell us about some of those wins.
So in gaming, AI or bots is something that, or non-player characters, NPC, is a very popular term, has been around for decades. But largely, as in principle, we are no bot sort of policy, only real games.
So if I'm going to ever play a game, it'll always be against another human.
Yes, real human.
That's again a part of your responsibility framework, it seems.
Yes.
Also the trust builder, sure.
Yes. And but we do leverage the prediction capability of AI and ML in our, let's say, churn prediction models, or certain models that can avoid any sort of colluding players.
Okay.
Right. So this is where largely the ML is leveraged. We've done some interesting experiments on content as well, leveraging generative AI, whether it is to from text to images, to even testing certain concerts where voice modulation is also done by AI for some of our celebrity campaigns.
Okay.
Right. So there are multiple applications that we are playing around with, but it also helps us, let's say, test certain games even before we go and hit the market in terms of playability, stickiness. These are certain things where AI and ML is leveraged.
Interesting. You mentioned celebrities, and usually gaming industries is very well known for leveraging a whole bunch of these faces across ecosystems. In terms of just the trust marker of it, which is probably one large delta that you expect to bring in, at what point do you think this is, let's say, justified an incremental new user base or more frequency from existing users, or how do you kind of do the math on whether a celebrity is worth it, and then which one?
So celebrity definitely helps you get the attention, but a celebrity without the right messaging can be detrimental.
Sure.
Right? So first is to understand the triggers or barriers or the challenges and what user stage you're trying to communicate to. Let's say if I am trying to capture the ludo market, it needs to, or my campaign should be talking about that this is ludo equals to Zupee, right? And that's what we're trying to achieve as well.
Sure.
Celebrity definitely helps get the attention and to a certain extent certain trust markers, which is as opposed to a real human truth for a RMG ecosystem, could be that the user is maybe somewhat figuring out recreational activity, because a larger driver is winning, right? Over and above that, celebrity adds to a certain trust, which helps him move further in the journey.
Fair enough. So likelihood is you will continue to invest in that side, and that helps in terms of the metrics moving in a certain direction as well. One of the bits that you spoke about with respect to the stack and the predictive models and churn prediction, just zooming into the whole real-time intervention, because of when the user is in the application and he's doing something and he's showing signs of perhaps moving in a direction which is not desirable, there is room to kind of make an in-the-moment intervention and do something about it. Is that something that you actively practice? Is that a large bunch of things that happen during the session itself? Is maybe the part of the product experience, maybe a part of an overlay or a pop-up that's triggered by an external system? How does it, what kind of control do you have or on that sort of things?
So largely it plays into our segmentation portfolio where basis certain behavior, the model can actually predict that the user is going to churn in the next 7 days or odd days. And then multiple journeys are triggered. Right. One is obviously the Marcom piece of it. Second is the offer panel.
Offer panel is the real estate in the application itself?
Yes. There are certain coupons that get activated. Third is a more investigative journey, which looks into whether the user has any experience issues, or is it related to certain tickets that are open, or addressal to any grievance that he might have had.
Sure.
Multiple things get triggered, and that is largely happening at the back of the model studying into multiple variables like his PNL, frequency, buying behavior is changing, the number of times that he's playing on the application is reducing, the number of game player days. This is a very critical metric for any gaming company. If that is kind of dropping, then his previous behavior. And it reads into multiple variables and tend to give an output or a prediction.
How much of this would happen like in real time? So if I've opened the app and I have, let's say, whatever context that your system already knows, I'll be able to serve me a different, and you said the offer space is already getting customized basis my history with it. But during my session, if I made these 3 clicks instead of these 3 clicks, would something change?
So some bit of it is real time.
No, of course, it can't be 100%.
Yeah, the recommendation, the table recommendation is something that is reading into the previous game behavior. Second is the kind of communication or offers that are available for him. But that's largely the application as of now.
Sure. Very interesting lenses in terms of how gaming industry can be responsible at the same time actually grab market share on a very Bharat habit of ludo. And at this point, it looks like ludo is going to be the mainstay for some time to come, because there's enough more people who need to learn to play ludo online and discover the fun of playing with somebody they can, perhaps see as a name and a face. Yeah, and that's where your winning story lies.
So we still believe, and I mean, there is a large addressable market out there that is ludo. We also have other games like snakes and ladders. We have few games on cricket, but largely being a super app but we want to stand for Ludo, and that's the market
That's
we're
where your
trying to
marketing
capture.
efforts also lie.
Yeah.
But in terms of just the cross-pollination bit of it, is that an aggressive or an important track at the moment that people who have come in for Ludo should also play other things, or is this something that will have independent discovery paths?
So cross promotion is something that we keep dabbling
Sure.
with. Again, that playbook is something that is maturing over time. You also have to understand that time spent on Ludo versus time spent on other game could result in a very different revenue
Absolutely.
per user. So it's a very sensitive
Conscious
migration.
choice has to, if it has to be made.
Yeah.
And you might not cover everybody there, but if somebody is kind of dropping away from Ludo, maybe there's other people going to try with snakes and ladders.
Yeah.
Awesome. This was extremely interesting. Thank you so much for the time, Nishant. I'm glad I had this conversation. A lot more that I know about Bharat and gaming and how trust is built. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.